Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at Hawk Blogger, and it is we're in the dog days of it, folks. We're in between the draft and training camp, and there's not a lot of NFL news going around. We're gonna have the schedule coming out here, hopefully this week. We're starting to get a few leaks about certain games here and there, but we will certainly have some conversation about the schedule once it comes out. But we're going to be kind of diving into some different aspects of the team and the division. And we'll probably start going around the division and the NFC a little bit more as we kind of fill in this big gap in the NFL calendar. Before I do talk about today's agenda and topic, congratulations to everybody. We're at episode 50. So this creeped up on me pretty quick. We're 50 days in a row, episode 50. Thank you to everybody who's been tuning in from show number 1, which feels like just yesterday. And good to see some of the YouTube members in here in the chat. Good morning to JJ Berenio. Good morning to Hawks fan Matt Man. Good morning to Rick R. Good morning to everybody who's tuning in. I hope you're steeled against the week ahead. It is a new work week, and everybody's hopefully ready for whatever's to come as we head into the summer, spring months of work, which can be, I don't know. I always felt like on one hand, you had a little more energy going into work on those days. On another hand, you just stare at the window and think about where you should be and where you aren't. At least that was me. So, never will look at a Northwest summer as a negative thing, but I do remember feeling like I missed quite a few of those all the years that I was working all the crazy hours. And good morning to Ryan Cleveland. How you doing, Ryan? So what I want to talk about today is a 53-man roster projection for the Seahawks. And obviously it's way early and there's a ton of information we don't have. I generally don't do these until at least I've seen players live at camp, and then I will have a better idea of where things fall. So the efficacy of this roster projection is going to be the worst of any of the roster projections I will do. But I think it's worth at least having the conversation about where there's going to be competition heading into camp, where there's maybe some weakness on the roster that could turn into a move, a trade, nothing necessarily major, but where are some places where we could see the team maybe make some moves that are a little harder to anticipate unless you look at the roster with some detail. As we do that, I thought it'd be worthwhile to do a little rewind back to last year when there were roster cuts and when we got down to the 53-man roster. And if you remember, with the new rules, all the cuts happened the same day. It used to be that there were these kind of lead ups to the final roster, but essentially they went from, it wasn't quite 90, but they went from their full roster down to 53 in one day. And so I wanted to go through and tell you, remind you, kind of refresh all of our memories about who was waived and who was kept and how many they kept at different positions. And the other note I would share there is that was the final roster cut down of Pete Carroll's era. This is a new era with Mike Macdonald. And so I am going to start resetting my roster a little bit. I'm going to take this opportunity to reset it because Mike Macdonald's going to probably play things a little bit differently. He might keep different amounts of different types of positions. I think the positions are a little bit different than they were with Pete Carroll. So this may not exactly map, but it's still a worthwhile exercise. So last year, what they did to get down to 53 was 3 guys were waived as injured. That was safety Joey Blount, linebacker Vi Jones, and safety Jonathan Sutherland. Both Blount and Sutherland were regrettable waivers and injury issues. I think both of those guys had a real chance to make the roster, especially on the special team side, before camp and before their injuries. Put on injured reserve or the PUP list were 2 nose tackles, Austin Feolu and Brian Monet. Neither of them are still with the team, but there were 2 guys that went on PUP or injured reserve. And then there were some of the waived guys. Quarterback Holton Ahlers, who for my money is still the most interesting third quarterback option I've seen the Seahawks trot out there for a little while. Outside linebacker Levi Bell, single tier. Cornerback Lance Boykin, tackle Greg Island, nose tackle Matthew Gotel, wide receiver John Hall, wide receiver Cade Johnson, wide receiver Matt Landers. Matt Landers got some big initial undrafted free agent buzz with his physical skills, but never amounted to much. Tight end Tyler Mayberry, linebacker Patrick O'Connell, safety Ty Okada, defensive end Roderick Perry, guard Kendall Randolph, defensive end Jacob Sykes, running back Sir Roderick Thompson Jr., wide receiver Aesop Winston Jr., linebacker Christian Young, and then 2 guys were terminated as vested veterans. One was linebacker Ben Burkervin. The other was center Joey Hunt. As far as who they kept last year and what numbers, they only kept 2 quarterbacks, Geno Smith and Drew Lock. They kept 4 running backs. And I think this is a position we should come back to as we set the roster here today. Kenneth Walker III, Zach Charbonnet, DJ Dallas, and Kenny McIntosh. So 1 opening on the running back spot relative to DJ Dallas being gone. On receiver, they kept 6 last year. This is also a number that is worth talking about. They kept 6, and those names were Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jake Bobo, Derek Young, and Cody Thompson. Of those names, I think only Cody Thompson is one that is maybe not going to be here or is not here and not on the roster. Tight end, they kept 3. And that was Will Dissly, Noah Fant, and Colby Parkinson. So 2 of those 3 are gone. Offensive line, they kept 9. Another number to keep in mind. They kept 9 last year. Charles Cross, Damian Lewis, Evan Brown, who's gone, Phil Haynes, who's gone, Abe Lucas, Olu Oluwatimi, Anthony Bradford, Jake Curhan, who's gone, and Stone Forsyth. Defensive line, they kept 6. Draymond Jones, Jaron Reed, Mario Edwards, who's gone, Mike Morris, Miles Adams, and Cameron Young. And when they say defensive line here, they're talking about both defensive tackles and defensive ends. Not edge players, but interior defensive ends in a 3-4. Linebacker, they kept 10. Now, linebacker, when they say 10 here, they're talking about edge players and inside linebackers. So that's a big number. They kept Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, Devin Bush, who's gone, John Radigan, Nick Ballore, who's gone, Uchenna Nwosu, Daryl Taylor, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, and Tyreek Smith, who is gone. All right. So really, if that breaks down, you're talking about, I would say 4 to 5 inside linebackers. Nick Ballore is really a special teams player, but if anything, as a position player, he counted as an inside backer or off-ball linebacker. So that was 5. It was really 5 and 5. And I'm going to split this out in my roster where we're going to have inside linebacker and edge as 2 different position groups, because I made that change yesterday just because I want to track those 2 as different. They're really just very different positions, and I want to see the depth that Mike McDonald chooses to have, because I think that's going to be instructive going forward. At cornerback, the Seahawks kept 6 players. They kept Reek Woolen, Trey Brown, Mike Jackson, Devin Witherspoon, Kobe Bryant, and Artie Burns. All are still here, although I would say Kobe Bryant's not really counted as a corner right now. Safety, they kept 4. Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, Julian Love, and Jarek Reed. 2 of those 4 are not here. One of those 4 is injured, and we'll talk about where I think he ends up, Jarek Reed. So only one of the 4 from last year really likely to make opening day roster. And then the specialists that kept 3, Dixon, Jason Myers, and Chris Stoll. All right. So that gives you a little bit of a rewind to who they kept last year, who they cut. I don't know if there's any of the guys that they cut that I think anybody has PTSD about, really wishing that they had kept. I mean, I don't think there's any of those names. The only ones that I think, well, and we'll talk about this, are some of the waived injured guys, especially Jonathan Sutherland, who I'm pretty high on and think has a potential good chance to make the roster. All right. So as we get into it, and I'm going to let me do this for my own reference, if you don't mind taking a second here. I'm going to put in the numbers that they kept at all the different positions last year. So 2, 4 for running back, 6 for receiver, 3 for tight end. They did 9 offensive line. So I'll do that. They did 6 defensive line, which is really defensive tackle with some defensive ends in the 3-4. Inside linebacker, they kept 5. Outside linebacker edge, they kept 5. Cornerback, they kept 6, I think I remember. Yep, 6. Safety, they kept 4. And then, okay. All right. As we go along, play along with, would be happy to have you do that. We'll start with what I think is an easy, straightforward one. Quarterback. Most important position on the roster. The Seahawks kept 2 players last year. There's been some discussion about the fact that they don't really have a third quarterback on the roster, how much of an issue that is. Is it an issue? I'm projecting that they will keep 2 players at the quarterback position, just like they did last year. And instead of Drew Lock, it'll be Geno Smith and Sam Howell. I think that's a pretty straightforward one. Curious if anyone sees it differently or if they expect a third quarterback to show up. Obviously, they'll sign somebody to bring in to take some training camp throws. Wouldn't be surprised if they try to find someone for practice squad. But as of now, roster-wise, I don't think there's much of a question. It'll be Geno Smith and Sam Howell, and I think it'll be a fun to watch. That's actually one of the things in training camp I would be most eager to see is just how those guys look. Those are 2 legitimate starting quarterbacks. Seahawks haven't had that in many, many years. I think really since the Matt Flynn, Russell Wilson era, they have not had 2 legitimate starting quarterbacks. You could say it was when there was Russell Wilson and Geno Smith. At that point, Geno Smith wasn't really seen as a legitimate starting quarterback. But both of these guys right now have started as recently as last year and I think could start for a number of NFL teams. At the running back position, I am projecting that the Seahawks keep 4 again. Now, it's worth noting there's times the Seahawks have kept 5. And oops, we're missing a guy. All right, hold on one sec. This is one of the areas that I have some question about. But let's talk about it. It kind of relates to tight end, okay? I'm projecting that they're going to keep 4. And I might, by the way, these are happening real time. So I might change this in the middle. We'll go back and reset once we do that. But right now I'm saying 4. I think they'll keep Ken Walker. I think that's a pretty good bet. Zach Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh, and then I'm projecting that George Halani will make it as the 4th back. And as we go through, I want to welcome a new member. Welcome to Anderson, a YouTube member. So great to have you. Everybody would love to have more YouTube members. We're still growing that community. You can join. The link is pinned in the chat as well as in the description of the video. Great to have you. And now I know when he has a comment or a question, it shows up with a little emblem and he gets access to the custom emojis and chat and all sorts of fun stuff. So Great to have Anderson join us, and welcome to the crew. All right, so for running back, I have this question as it relates to one Jack Westover. I see Jack Westover as an H-back. I see him not as a pure tight end, but as someone who can fill a little bit of the Kyle Juszczyk kind of role. I don't know if he's physical enough to be able to block as a fullback. I didn't really see him do that in college, but maybe the clearest path to him making the roster would be if the Seahawks decide that they want a fullback and decide that they want him to be able to play both tight end and fullback. What would have to happen if they did that is they'd have to go down to 5 wide receivers in order to make space for what's essentially either an extra tight end or an extra running back. They could steal from defense. As of now, just to give you an idea, last year they kept 24 players on offense and they kept 26 players on defense. So they did keep an extra player on defense last year. They could steal from cornerback as a place. They could steal potentially from safety. Inside linebacker is another place they could steal a roster spot from. But as of now, I don't have Jack Westover making the roster. By the end of this exercise, maybe I'll change my mind. But that's the one question mark for me at running back. I don't think there's really another guy in competition for that spot. I do think the Seahawks will likely add to that position and have a little more competition in camp, but Helani feels to me like a pretty clear, he has a very good chance to make this roster. So that's the first new name other than, well, Sam Howell's a new name, but that's the first kind of Sam Howell's coming into the camp knowing he's on the roster. George Helani is someone who's trying out, and I think he has a very good chance of making it. Wide receiver, as of now, I have the Seahawks keeping the same amount of receivers as last year, which is 6. I will say that the Seahawks have vacillated in past between 5 and 6 receivers. So they definitely could just go with 5. And I think Tyler Lockett's going to make it, and DK Metcalf's going to make it, and Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to make it. And I think Jake Bobo, those are the 4 guys I have as pretty much locks to make it. I could argue that Bobo shouldn't be a lock, but as of now, between the fact that he is a great blocking receiver and had a very, solid rookie year, can play multiple positions, I think Bobo is pretty close to a lock. So if they were to only go 5 wide receivers, there's a pretty big competition for who that 5th receiver would be. I'm projecting they go with 6, and we can debate who those would be. So this is the first place where I think there's a lot of question marks. And the guys that would be vying for, let's call it 2 positions. You've got Derek Young, Laviska Shenault, D. Eskridge, Aesop Winston Jr., and let's even throw Hayden Hatton into that mix. All right. Undrafted free agent, has some decent, interesting pieces. Some people want to talk about D. Williams as a returner. I'm not going to include him in my conversation right now. That feels, and I'll tell you why. Laviska Shenault is a pretty clearly better receiver, an established veteran, and can be a returner and has been a returner. I don't know that you need him. I think George Helani could potentially be a returner if you needed him to. Kenny McIntosh maybe could be a returner. I think there's a lot of guys that could be returners, and I don't know that you need D. Williams on there just as a return man. That feels like a pretty big use of a roster spot. Now, the way I have it right now is I have Derek Young as the 5th guy. So if they only keep 5, I have Derek Young as the 5th. I think Derek Young is an excellent special teams player and a decent receiver who dealt with some injury last year. And I think he is physical enough to be a good blocker. And people forget about this, but Derek Young was essentially used as a running back in college, doing a lot of end arounds. I think his potential as a weapon on offense has not been fully explored and could be something that's particularly interesting to Grub and how they want to play the game. I think Chenault also gives them a guy that can be a bubble screen kind of player. And so I have him as right after Derek Young. I think Chenault was a guy who, like I said, could be a returner, is more of a yards after catch kind of guy. And right now, I have them both ahead of D. Eskridge. Why do I have them ahead of D. Eskridge? One, Eskridge is in the last throes of his deal and has not proven that he can stay healthy. I don't think I know everyone hates D. Eskridge, and that's fine. I don't hate D. Eskridge. He's just never been healthy and never shown enough to where I really care one way or another about him. And I think it would be he's battling uphill odds, I think, to make the roster, given some of the competition going on there. The other 2 guys that I think are part of this battle, Aesop Winston Jr. and Hayden Hatton. As Hawks fan Matt Mann brings up, yes, it was Trey Brown on the interview I did with him last week. I asked him who are some sleepers that he doesn't think gets enough attention. And the 2 guys he mentioned were Derek Young and Aesop Winston Jr. He's talked about Aesop Winston having the best hands on the team. And Derek Young, he didn't have as specific, but just that he's a hard worker and likes his game. I was impressed with Aesop Winston last year. He ran good routes. He did have good hands. I think he made plays. He's fighting an uphill battle just in the pedigree, thing, and kind of got into this with Trey a little bit in that I've talked about this with other players. Draft status, it's like in the professional world, somebody that has a Ivy League degree or they have an MBA, and you might be better at the job. You might be more skilled. You might have more experience and proven more. But there's just this kind of inside track that people get when they have those pedigrees. And so if you're a draft pick versus an undrafted free agent, if you went to Alabama or even University of Washington versus Washington State, you have an advantage. And so Aesop Winston's battling that as much as anything. But he's a good receiver, and I think he's the classic kind of guy that could be on the practice squad again because he is a NFL quality receiver. And if the team needs to have someone come up to fill a spot, he might be the best receiver who's not part of the top 4. So he is somebody to watch. Hayden Hatton's a guy who, as I watched him, is a little different than some of these other guys. He is a high point specialist. He's a 50-50 ball guy. He's got great leaping ability and good hands. Like, he does not drop the ball. And so while I didn't see as much like excellent route running from him as maybe I expected, he tends to be more of the fade pattern, go up and get it guy. I don't know that anyone else on the roster really is great at that. You'd think DK Metcalf would be great at that, but he's not. He's never been, for a guy that can jump out of the roof, he has never been a guy who's excellent at high pointing the football. Golden Tate was better at high pointing the ball at 5'10" than DK Metcalf is at 6'3", 6'4", whatever he is, and his 48-inch vertical leap or whatever he's got. So it's an interesting skill set, and it might be something that gives Hayden Hatton a chance to be in the competition, if not for the roster, for the practice squad. So the way I have it right now is if they keep 5, Derek Young makes it. If they keep 6, Laviska Shenault Jr. makes it. And that the guys that are going to be in competition to push for those last 2 spots are D. Eskridge next, then Aesop Winston, then Hayden Hatton in that order. All right. So that's 6 at receiver. So right now, Derek Young and Laviska Shenault make it on this initial projection. Then we move to tight end. And tight end, they kept 3 last year. I think they'll keep 3 this year. Noah Fant, Pharaoh Brown, they signed in free agency, and AJ Barner. I think those are pretty clear cut. I don't have any hesitation about any of those guys making it. But then this is where the Jack Westover thing comes in. I think Jack Westover will be a practice squad player, but there is a chance, depending on how his chances of making the team go up significantly if once we get to training camp, you hear reports of Jack Westover lining up in the backfield. If that happens, he is the only guy that I think is really capable of that on this roster, and that would give him a real advantage and a better chance to do it. After Westover, I've got Tyler Mayberry, and then Russell Brady. And those 2 guys, Mayberry's been on practice squad for years. I've been a Tyler Mayberry fan for a while. The coaching staffs have loved him. He's never quite made it. He's essentially primarily a blocker, but he's a good one. But he's also got some receiving talent. Russell Brady came over last year and played and was a decent blocker. In fact, I meant to look up what his grades were last year. Whoops. And see how he graded out as a blocker. All right, hold on. All right. Russell Brady. I could have sworn. Let's look at the Seahawks roster. Oh, Brady Russell. That's why. All right. You're not allowed to have your name backwards in my world. That's a backwards name. It's too confusing. All right. So Brady Russell did not grade out that well last year. He had a 59.5 run block grade. He only had 14 run block snaps. So he only had 16 snaps total. Yeah. So I have him as last, but someone to at least keep an eye on. Tyler Mayberry, I think, is better. 1 second here. Sorry about that. All right. So 3 guys make it at tight end: Noah Fant, Pharaoh Brown, AJ Barner. By the way, I really like that tight end room. You got 1 clear receiver, and you got 2 guys that can make a good catch when you need them to, solid catchers of the football, but really solid physical run blockers. I like that tight end room. I like the makeup of it. I feel good about it. All right. Offensive line. For now, for this first path through, I'm going to go with the same number of offensive linemen as they kept last year, which is 9. I always find myself wanting to keep 10, and they just they often keep just 9. And the way I thought about breaking this out by tackles and interior linemen, but for now I've just kept it as offensive line, like they do on the general roster reports when they do the 53-man roster cuts. So the 9 guys that I have them keeping right now: Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Christian Haynes, George Fant, Olu Oluwatimi, that's 5, by the way, Anthony Bradford, Laken Tomlinson, Mike Jarrell, talk about that in a second, Satoa Lamea. That is, if you're counting along with me, that is 9. Now, you might have noticed, and maybe not, there's a name I did not call who the Seahawks signed as a free agent and as a vet kind of backup on the interior line. That's Nick Harris. So if they just go with 9, I have Nick Harris not making the roster, which is controversial. And I don't know how I feel about it yet. And I might change it by the end of this show. We'll see. A couple other names that I don't have making it are McClendon Curtis and Raekwon O'Neal, who are guys that were picked off of practice squads from last year on other teams and kept on the roster through the year. And I know that the team feels has potential. I also do not have Tremaine Akram making the team. So that's a guy they signed. Let me make sure I get back because I didn't have him on this list. That is another guy that is worth talking about. Sorry, I'm updating my roster. That would be a bit of an upset if he didn't make it. He has a very long name. Got to extend my columns here. All right. So if we break this down a little further, with the 9 guys that I currently have making the team, at tackle, you've got Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, George Fant is a swing tackle. And then I've got Mike Jarrell. Oh, I also Stone Forsyth. It's another name. Sorry. Some of the places I was getting rosters were clearly not complete. So let me move these guys down again. Make some space for Forsyth. This is going to be a tough group to project, to be honest. Going back to last year, they had how many? Garrett Greenfield, I do not have making it either. Sorry. So I'll read you the full list and then we'll go through this. So the guys I have making it: Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Christian Haynes, George Fant, Ola Oluwatimi, Anthony Bradford, Laken Tomlinson, Mike Jarrell, and Satoa Laumea. The guys on the bubble really are Nick Harris, Stone Forsyth, Tremaine Akram, McClendon Curtis, and Raekwon O'Neal. I have Garrett Greenfield and Mike Nowitzki not making it. I think Garrett Greenfield is a very likely practice squad candidate. I'd say he's a highly likely practice squad candidate. But I do not have him. I think there's way too much competition for him to make the roster. So getting back, last year, they kept tackles that they kept. Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Jake Curhan could play it, and Stone Forsyth. So they had 3 guys that were only tackles. That was Stone, Abe Lucas, and Charles Cross. And then they added Jake Curran was a swing guard tackle. He played a lot of tackle last year, which was a disaster. So you could say really 4. And if we go by, what was at the end of the season? I think by the end of the season, they had 4 tackles on their roster. Let's see. One sec. Right. They had Jason Peters, Abe Lucas, Stone Forsythe, Charles Cross. Yeah. So they had 4 tackles by the end of the year on their roster. I think that they go with 4 tackles this time. I think Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, and George Fant are locks. And then I have got Mike Jarrell beating out Stone Forsythe and Garrett Greenfield, and potentially either McClendon Curtis or Raekwon O'Neal who can play some tackle. I'm going on a limb. I have a feeling Jarrell is going to be better than they expected and not someone that they feel they can expose to practice squad. And so I think they'll keep 4 tackles. The other question here with Nick Harris on my 9-man offensive line group not making it. Let me just double check my count here. See, yeah, I do have that right. Olu Olutimi is the center. I have the team looking at Christian Haynes as a backup center. If that's not a legitimate option, then Nick Harris has to make the team because they have to have a backup center. I see Haynes as being a guy that could get some snaps there. I'm not sure anyone else could. So that's where Nick Harris is right on the edge. And if I was to totally guess, he probably makes it. I mean, he's familiar with Huff and he's familiar with, UW and they signed him as a relatively early free agent, and he can play guard or center. He's just a good guy to have on the roster. But he's also a guy that most likely, if things go well, he doesn't play for you at all. So to have him on the roster for a 1-year veteran thing and then potentially expose losing one of your young players, that's where I have some questions. Let's take a look at his guaranteed money. Let's talk real talk about what contracts are. Nick Harris, his deal. Where is it? Nick, there it is. All right. He has no guaranteed money. Nick Harris can be cut, and there would be, let's just double check this. There would be $1 million in dead money. So I'm not sure. Must have had some kind of, not sure why that is. Oh, he had a prorated signing bonus. Okay. So there is some money already committed there. But it's a 1-year deal. You'd save $1.4 million in the cap. He is just 26, so I think it's important to remember he's not the old dude that you're like getting out from under. He could be someone who sticks around. But you could get out from under that contract and save some money, and they might try to do that with some of these rookies. So center is a question mark here. Guard, you end up with Christian Haynes, Anthony Bradford, Laken Tomlinson. I think all of those guys are locks. And then you have Mike Jarrell and Satoa Lamea, who both can play guard and both can, in a pinch, play tackle. I think Jarrell is a better option at tackle, but I think he's a true like tackle athlete. And I think Lamea really needs to play inside. So I like this general setup for the offensive line, having basically 4 tackles, 4 guards, and then 1 guy who can swing between guard and center if you need him to. And I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world. In fact, it may end up being the best setup if you have Christian Haynes at center and Bradford and Tomlinson at guard, or Jarrell or Lamea at one of the guards. I don't know that that would be the worst outcome. And as far as Tremaine Ankrum, who they also signed, let's talk about his contract and what the implications would be. There would only be $100,000 of dead money if they cut Tremaine Ankrum, and they would save $1 million in cap space. So I do think that that plays a little bit of a role. I don't think Tremaine Ankrum is at all a lock to make this team. And he's barely played in the years he's been in the NFL. So I'm not counting on him making this team at all. And in fact, I think a very good outcome is that he doesn't make the team. I think it's a very good outcome that Nick Harris doesn't make the team, to be honest. Not that I don't like Nick Harris, but if you've got rookies playing so well that they push other guys off the roster that are veterans, that's ideal. So I think the biggest stretch for me is projecting two 6th-round picks in Jarrell and Laumea, both making the 53-man roster. I have a decent feeling about those two. I really do. And I don't like Stone Forsythe that much. I think he's a limited athlete. If you have him as your swing tackle, I think George Fant is already a better option than Forsythe, and I think that allows you to walk away from Stone Forsythe. And then I think you got younger guys that are better athletes and have more upside. By the way, if you walked away from Stone Forsythe, there would only be $41,000 of dead money, and you'd save $1 million in cap space. So, there are these guys that you would save some money from moving on from. I see a question here. 67 Plush says they paid Garrett Greenfield a big chunk of money on UDFA. He's highly sought after. He might not make it to the practice squad. That's possible. I would say that we as fans tend to overrate the back end of the roster guys that we have and think that other teams are going to snatch them up. It happens, but it's been a while since that's really happened. Who's the last guy signed off the Seahawks practice squad or stolen from the Seahawks that didn't make it to the practice squad? I honestly can't think of anybody. It's been a long time. And the way it would work with Greenfield, if they do like him, they would keep him up to the final day. And you have to remember that it just makes it harder for teams to decide they want to snatch somebody up. They'd have to sign him to their 53. Some other team offering the practice squad doesn't do him any good. He's already got a better deal with the Seahawks and knows them and been working with them. But it's possible. The other thing to remember about this is guys that get signed off, stolen from, you trying to keep them on your practice squad. There aren't a ton of them that end up being particularly valuable players. I see folks talking about Bo Melton as a good example. I don't think that the Seahawks are hurting because they lost Bo Melton off of their squad. I think he's a fine receiver. He does good things for the Packers. I don't think that they'd rather have Bo Melton than Jake Bobo. And that's the kind of thing you're talking about. And I'm not sure that they'd even rather have Bo Melton than Derek Young. So that's where I'm not so worried about Greenfield, but we'll see. We'll see. If people were that excited to have Garrett Greenfield, they would have drafted him. Are you having less of a risk with Jarrell or Laumea potentially being exposed to practice squad? I think you might be. All right, so that's my 9-man offensive line. And now we're going to get to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive line, and this is really the tackles, defensive end, nose tackle. We've got Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Draymond Jones, which let's put an asterisk by Draymond Jones. Come back to that. Jaron Reed, Cam Young, and Mike Morris. They kept 6 last year. Those are 6 names this year. I am very confident that Jonathan Hankins is going to make this squad. And he could battle with Matt Gotel, but I think Hankins makes it. And what that means is that I think Draymond Jones will count more as an outside linebacker than he will as a defensive lineman. Why does that matter? Because I think it'll matter when you'll see when we get there that Draymond Jones makes the math work as an outside linebacker, not as a defensive lineman. So they kept 6, quote, defensive linemen, defensive tackles, defensive ends in a 3-4 last year. I have them keeping 6 in this first pass through. And those 6, as I move Draymond Jones out of that list, the 6 are Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Jaron Reed, Cam Young, Mike Morris, and Jonathan Hankins. I do think that it's worth debating whether Cam Young gets pushed out by Matt Gotel. Matt Gotel, if you don't remember, he's a 340-pound nose tackle. He did not get a lot of play, but could be someone who makes a lot more sense in Mike McDonald's defensive formations and scheme than he did last year. And Cam Young, he's a strong dude, but he's not the biggest guy. And he was just a later round pick. I don't think that you can assume he's safe. I think he has the edge over Gotel, but I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a little bit of a battle in camp. And so as like pure nose tackles, the guys on the list are Jonathan Hankins and Cam Young, or you'd swap out Gotel. But for my list, Cam Young and Jonathan Hankins are your nose tackles, your pure nose tackles. But then you have guys that can play that position in Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, and even Leonard Williams. Your ends, your defensive ends in this are going to be Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Jaron Reed, and Mike Morris. I think that's a good rotation. I think Mike Morris is a guy I'm very eager to see what he's like in this scheme and just on the field in general. Who that means does not make the squad. Matt Gotel, as of right now, is on the outside looking in. Miles Adams. I think Miles Adams is not a fit for this scheme. I don't think he makes it. I don't think he's strong enough against the run. And I think we're going to see defensive linemen who are not good run defenders not make Mike McDonald's roster. Which brings us to the next guy, Buda Jones, who they signed as a training camp invitee. I think he's a very interesting guy. I think he's very likely a practice squad kind of guy. I don't see him pushing for a roster spot. I don't see there being a lot of competition for his services. And then the last guy is Devere Levelston, who is a guy who played with Byron Murphy at DeSoto in Texas. I don't think he makes it. So those are the guys I have on the outside looking in. So again, defensive line, Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Jaron Reed, Mike Morris, Jonathan Hankins, and Cam Young. Now we get to linebacker, and I split this out as inside linebacker versus outside linebacker or edge. So off ball, inside linebacker, Jerome Baker, Tyrell Dodson are the clear locks. From there, it's I don't know, guys. You could argue it is kind of open season. I will tell you what I have right now, and we'll see if any of these turn out to be right. As of right now, I have them. They kept 5 last year, and that one of them was Nick Bellore. So I'm going to actually cut that down to 4 this year. And that means we have 1 roster spot left to give. If I forget that, remind me. We have 1 roster spot left to give. I have only have them keeping 4 inside linebackers. And the 4 names that I have them keeping are Jerome Baker, Tyrell Dodson, Tyrese Knight, their 4th round pick, and then I have them keeping Drake Thomas. Drake Thomas is a guy that they acquired last year, and I think is an interesting player, both as a special teamer and as an off-ball linebacker. He was, I want to say, a rookie last year, if I'm remembering right. He had a pretty dang good run defense grade. He only played 5 snaps, but he did grade out quite well in that regard. And he was an undrafted free agent for the Raiders last year that the Seahawks snagged. I think that he's a guy that they could find interesting. So I have Drake Thomas making it. What that means is that I have John Radigan not making it. And I think it's worth, we're going to hear about John Radigan almost certainly in the coming days or weeks, doing the same thing that they did with Mike Jackson and signing a vet minimum deal, which will cut some of his cap hit down. But as of now, he's a $3 million cap savings if he doesn't make the team at all. And I still think there's a decent chance he will not make the team. He's 25 years old, so he's not too old, but he is coming off some injury, not last year, but the year before. I'm not sure John Radigan is the type of linebacker that makes sense in Mike Macdonald's defense, where he's looking for linebackers who are really hybrid enough players to really cover well. And that's just never been John Radigan's game. I like John Radigan. I think he's a great special teams guy. I think special teams play is just reduced in value a little bit over the years, especially with what's happened. The types of players you need on kick coverage are going to change dramatically. Punt coverage, it still matters. It's just not a big part of the game. And so I don't think just based off of that John Radigan's going to make it just for special teams. And I think Drake Thomas is already a very good special teams player. And you have to hope that Tyrese Knight can be that as well. So I don't have John Radigan making it right now. I do have him as the next guy after Drake Thomas. And after Radigan, Patrick O'Connell's another guy that I think is quite good, but I think he's a little bit more of a mover than Radigan, and so could potentially show enough against coverage, but he again is much more of a run stopping linebacker. I like Patrick O'Connell quite a bit, but I don't think he makes it. I have Easton Gibbs after him. Easton Gibbs is a guy I'll be curious to watch. Very undersized, but has really been a leader and a high performance player at every stop along the way. He also has played a bunch of different positions and I think is going to show up as a very smart player that coaches are going to gravitate toward. But I think he's a fine potential practice squad guy, but I don't think it's likely that he makes the roster. And then Joshua Onagiogu, I also do not have making the roster. So those are the inside linebackers. Again, Jerome Baker, Tyrell Dodson, Tyrese Knight, Drake Thomas. That's a really, really concerning group. If you could add one solid up and coming guy to that group, it would make a big difference. Hopefully Tyrese Knight is that guy. I'm not assuming that he is. All right, so that's 4 at inside linebacker. Now we move to outside linebacker edge. I've got Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, and Darrell Taylor making the team. And everyone can freak out about Darrell Taylor, but I think that he's likely to do it. I do want to swap where he is in my list. So let's move him down. As I mentioned earlier, let's reread this because I now have it in the proper order. I have 5 guys making it. And those names are Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, Draymond Jones, and Darrell Taylor. So that's 5 guys, and Jones counting as an outside linebacker instead of as defensive lineman. And Darrell Taylor is the 5th out of those 5. And the guy that is going to be a camp battle with Darrell Taylor, maybe even with Derek Hall, even though Derek Hall was a 2nd round pick, so just last year. So probably he's a little safer. But is Nelson Caesar. Nelson Caesar is going to be in this battle, and he has a shot. There is a path to him making this roster. It would be to push either Darrell Taylor or Derek Hall off the roster. And folks, remember, Darrell Taylor, if he does not make the roster, it would only be a $20,000 dead money hit. It would be $3 million in cap savings. So that is the advantage that Nelson Caesar has in that battle. As of now, I'm going to assume that Caesar makes the practice squad and not the opening day roster, and that Darrell Taylor makes the opening day roster. That's going to be fascinating to watch because I just don't know how Mike Macdonald's going to view these different types of players and their different strengths and weaknesses. Darrell Taylor has been an awful run defender. How much does that hurt him in a Mike Macdonald evaluation? Part of me hopes it hurts him a lot. Mostly, I hope that Darrell Taylor finds run defense in his game and becomes a better run defender and unlocks as a pass rusher. That would be great. I mean, he's got some talent as a pass rusher, but he's just had some real downsides. So the ideal thing, even though everyone's super negative on Darrell Taylor, is that he becomes his full potential under Mike Macdonald. That would be the best outcome. But maybe the next best, if that doesn't work out, is that Nelson Caesar plays so well that he pushes Darrell Taylor off the roster. I think Darrell Taylor is a better player than Derek Hall. I think Derek Hall is very limited. I hope that he proves me wrong. He has not done that yet. He was not good last year. He wasn't even interesting last year. Rayson Williams is a guy that is on this list, but I don't have making the squad, and I think has he's a little bit bigger, so I could probably list him under defensive line, but I think he's mostly an edge kind of guy. He's 280, and so I'm going to put him. I'm going to put him in the edge group, which is where Draymond Jones, he's going to probably. I would bet Draymond Jones is going to be 270, 275 when he gets to camp. So similar place style. All right, cornerback. They kept 6 last year. I'm going to have them keeping 6 this year. This one's also kind of challenging, I gotta say. I'm going to be controversial here and say that they will keep 6 and that one of their draft picks is not going to make it. But we'll talk about that. So Devin Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen, Trey Brown, and Mike Jackson I have making the squad. If we find out Mike Jackson's playing safety, that would change things. But as of now, I'm going to assume they're going to keep him at cornerback, and I have him making the squad. I have Artie Burns making the squad. That might surprise some folks. I think Artie Burns is not going to go away easily. I think he's a good player. I think he's also a vet, which is a good thing. and for a very young room. And you'd save $1 million if he doesn't make the squad. I think he's worth that. I just do. And part of the reason I do is because I think he is legitimately an option at nickel and allows Witherspoon to play outside more if they want that to happen. And he's the only other guy other than Witherspoon who's proven to be a nickel corner. I think Trey can play that spot, but he hasn't in the NFL. So I do think Burns makes the squad. And then the sixth guy I have making it, I'm going to call DJ James as beating out Nehemiah Pritchett. Even though Pritchett was drafted ahead of James, I think James' skill set is going to be more interesting. I think the fact that he can play inside or outside is going to be valuable. And I think he's a better player than Pritchett. Pritchett is a better athlete in some ways, but James is interesting. There's some of these other guys that are worth talking about on the undrafted free agent list. Just want to pull up, make sure I've got the right list here. So Ro Torrance is a guy that I've got on that list, and I want to make sure I'm getting the right player here. Yeah, I think this was the long. Yeah, he's 6'3" with the 34-inch arms. So this was the like strong press corner. I think he's got a chance. Lance Boykin, who was on the squad last year, I don't have making it. Carlton Johnson is I believe he's the speedster, the 4.28 guy, if I'm remembering right. Yes, I am. So Carlton Johnson has fantastic speed, but I don't think he's likely to make the squad due to his other athletic limitations. And then Andrew Whitaker, who was with the squad last year, I also don't have making it. So I don't have Nehemiah Pritchett making it as it stands. And he's right at the edge. I think there's going to be a battle between Artie Burns, DJ James, and Nehemiah Pritchett. Depending on who makes it and how they see those players, they could probably get away with 5 players on corner because they've got so much flexibility between who can play inside and outside. But I don't know if they want to expose that. That's just where their deepest talent pool is at corner. So I think they're going to want to keep 6. They could go up to keep 7. I think that would be surprising, but it's possible. I'm not listing Kobe Bryant as a corner. Just keep in mind, we'll come to him at safety. But that also, if he makes it at safety, that also plays a role here because they know he can, in a pinch, play nickel corner. But as of now, I'm going to go with 6. I'm going to have James beating out Pritchett and Artie Burns also making the squad. So a very deep and interesting corner room. And I think Pritchett would make the practice squad. You'd hope that he doesn't get signed elsewhere. His profile is the type of guy that definitely could get signed elsewhere, and you just have to deal with it if that's the way things play out. Safety, they had kept 4 last year. I'm having them keep 4 this year. The 4 names I'm having them keep, 3 should be pretty obvious. Julian Love, Rayshawn Jenkins, and Kayvon Wallace. Kayvon Wallace, people forget about. They signed as a free agent. I think is a lock to make this team. I think that's their 3 safeties by default. The 4th safety that I currently have making the roster is probably going to surprise people. I have Jonathan Sutherland as the 4th safety. I have him beating out Kobe Bryant and Ty Okada. And if you're saying screaming, what about Jarek Reed? What about Jarek Reed? I have Jarek Reed starting the year on PUP. John Schneider has said they're not sure if Reed will be ready for the beginning of the season. Coming off a major injury, I just assume they're going to PUP that guy. I don't see a reason to rush him back. If he was healthy, Jarek Reed would absolutely be on my list, but I'm going to assume he's a PUP guy. So the reason I have Sutherland making it over Bryant, I think Sutherland is a more interesting athlete. And let me see if I'm right about that from a metrics perspective. Kobe Bryant for me is DJ James is Kobe Bryant, except he's a little bit more interesting as a player. He's taller. And I would probably lean more towards DJ James than Kobe Bryant. They might say, well, DJ James is playing corner and we're talking about safety. That's fine. Kobe Bryant showed some things at safety last year for sure. But I just have this feeling about Jonathan Sutherland that he really flashed for me, and he flashed consistently for me. He is 5'11", 202 pounds. He bench pressed 225 25 times, was his 99th percentile for safeties. He has a 37.5-inch vertical, which is 84th percentile. Broad jump, 74th percentile. His speed is just okay. 4.58, so 63rd percentile. And his agility was decent, 70th percentile. If I pull up Kobe Bryant as an athlete, let me bring up Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant, I thought Kobe Bryant was shorter. I guess he's showing up as 6 feet, so he's taller, which is interesting, but weighs a little bit less, 190. Definitely weaker on bench press, 17 reps. 33-inch vert versus 37.5 for Sutherland. 40-yard dash was 4.54, so he is basically the same speed as Sutherland, but his shuttle and 3-cone were very poor, whereas Sutherland's were good. So Sutherland was 70th, 73rd percentile. Kobe Bryant was 35th percentile or 13th percentile, depending on which test you're looking at. Now, I'm not saying he just makes it because he's got better athletic percentiles. I'm saying, to my eye, I hadn't done this yet. I just looked at that for the first time. My eye, Jonathan Sutherland was a more interesting athlete than Kobe Bryant. I see a ceiling for Kobe Bryant as an athlete. I'm a little worried that he is not built to play safety and deliver the hits that we saw him. Like, he came up and delivered a great hit in preseason as safety, and it was like, okay, that's cool. I'm not sure I see his body being able to do that consistently. I also don't see him having the real athletic profile to really be helping a ton at safety at some of these deep spots in space. Sutherland, for me, just feels like a guy that can fit the run and play the pass. He's dealt with some injuries. I just like him as a player. So I'm taking a shot. Like I said, very early. We'll see what happens in camp. But I'm going to be the first probably to predict Sutherland over Kobe Bryant. I think Ty Okada is another guy to like. He's a good safety prospect, and I think all three of those guys are going to be battling like crazy to make the squad. And the ironic thing is, once Jarek Reed's healthy, they might all still get pushed off the roster and the practice squad, because Jarek Reed, to me, is a cut above. I think Jarek Reed has potential that those other guys don't. I really like Jarek Reed. We'll see what comes on. Hopefully he heals well and he's done rehab well and he comes back with a vengeance. But as of now, I have him as PUP. And as special teamers, we've got Michael Dixon, Jason Myers, Chris Stoll. So no conversation there. I wish there was for Jason Myers, but there's not. So with that roster as it stands, I did cut one extra player from inside linebacker, which has me. I have one roster spot I can hand out along all these positions. And I think I'm going to even out and give it to offense because they had 26 on defense last year. I'm going to take them down to 25, and I'm going to have offense get 25 as well. The names that are in the conversation for who gets this roster spot: Jack Westover and Nick Harris. Those are the two top names. You could also say D. Eskridge, but I don't think they're going to keep 7 receivers. So I think it's a conversation between Jack Westover and Nick Harris. I think it probably, like, your roster's better off if it's Nick Harris. So I'm going to go ahead and say 10 offensive linemen make it. That bulletproofs the offensive line a little bit more. I think Westover's a guy that is likely to be possible on your practice squad. Nick Harris is not. He's not. I don't think he's a practice squad guy. I think he'll get signed by somebody else. So that then I think further, I like that offensive line. If you can have Jarrell, Lamea, and Nick Harris all make it, I like that squad a little bit better and makes you a little bit less susceptible to injury at center if something happens there. All right. So that's the 53. I'll go through it one more time for you. Quarterback, Geno Smith, Sam Howell. Running back, Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh, and George Halani. Wide receiver, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jake Bobo, Derek Young, and Laviska Shenault. Tight end, Noah Fant, Farrell Brown, and AJ Barner. Offensive line, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Christian Haynes, George Fant, Olu Oluwatimi, Anthony Bradford, Laken Tomlinson, Mike Jarrell, Satoa Lamea, and Nick Harris. Defensive line, this is defensive tackle essentially, and defensive end: Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Jaron Reed, Mike Morris, Jonathan Hankins, and Cam Young. Inside linebacker or off-ball linebacker: Jerome Baker, Tyrell Dodson, Tyrese Knight, and Drake Thomas. Outside linebacker or edge: Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, Draymond Jones, and Darrell Taylor. Cornerback: Devin Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen, Trey Brown, Mike Jackson, Artie Burns, and DJ James. And finally, safety: Julian Love, Rayshawn Jenkins, Kayvon Wallace, and Jonathan Sutherland. And then Michael Dixon, Jason Myers, and Chris Stoll. So that's your 53. Curious how that sounds to you. If there's any players who you're like, really don't like, why'd that guy make it? Or I don't think he should, or I wish this guy should make it, or I think you're wrong, this guy's definitely going to make it. I'd love to hear from folks about that. I will tell you that I oddly am excited about the offensive line. Why? I'm kidding myself. I'm getting myself worked up for something that I'm sure is going to be awful. But I think the Laken Tomlinson signing was a sneaky good addition. I think his floor is pretty high. Not in terms of like he's going to be great, but I think his floor is higher than Anthony Bradford's floor, and higher than Damian Lewis's floor even last year, higher than Phil Haynes's floor last year. I just think he's a solid guard, and there's a chance the team got good value and that he was being really punished in his grading and his performance by playing with Zach Wilson the last few years in New York. So I think Tomlinson helps raise the floor there. I really like Christian Haynes. I think he's going to play a role in this team. It really does come down to the tackles, Cross and Lucas. If those guys can develop and stay healthy, and then center, I think Oluwatimi is going to be fine. I just think he's going to be fine. As I said at the draft, I'd be excited if Christian Haynes ends up cross training there, and eventually, I think that's his highest upside position. But I think he also has a lot of potential at guard, so I don't hate that. And then Jarrell, I just have this feeling. I have this feeling they might have gotten something there, and we're gonna find out as training camp and the pads come on for sure. That's where we're really gonna find out. And Laumea, I think he's very projectable, and so I think there's just some guys there that are interesting, and they're more interesting to me than Stone Forsythe. They're more interesting to me than Tremaine Ankrum. So that's a position I guess I like better than I expected to. I like the defensive line room as well. The defensive ends, especially Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Jaron Reed, Mike Morris. I love that rotation. I think Mike Morris, again, is a sleeper. Really looking forward to seeing what he can do when he gets on the field. I am curious. I'm curious when we see Laviska Shenault. Is he going to be a sneaky player for this offense? Is he going to fill a role? The Seahawks tried to bubble screen with Jackson Smith and Jigba last year, and they don't have the right guy. I think Shenault can be that guy potentially. I think also Derek Young is a guy, as I said, an interesting weapon that people forget about his ability as a runner, not just as a receiver. And then Jake Bobo, who, just never gets well, I shouldn't say never. He gets love, but he doesn't get I think enough attention in his second year about what kind of player he's going to be and what kind of blocker he is. I think as the position groups that I feel uncomfortable with, really it's inside linebacker is the one that just jumps out. It's the off-ball linebacker is really thin. When you're talking about Drake Thomas versus John Radigan or Patrick O'Connell or Easton Gibbs, yikes. And even the starters, Tyrell Dodson is a projection and you hope is good, but you don't know. And yeah, so it feels like that's a position that they might still try to figure out a way to add to coming into training camp. Yeah, I guess I look at this and let's just quickly grade it. Safety, I think that's a C room, maybe C plus depending. Cornerback, I think, is an A minus room. Edge is a B, like a solid B room. Inside linebacker is like, if the starters are healthy and good, that could be a B room, but I'm going to say it's like a C plus room as it stands. Defensive line, I think that's a B plus room with the potential to move into the A minus territory. There's just some guys that have to, we don't know yet with Mike Morris and Byron Murphy. We have to see it. Offensive line, I think that's a C minus room probably at this point until somebody emerges as being very good, but I think it's got potential to raise up. Tight ends, I think the tight ends are a B plus, like a solid B. Wide receiver that's probably like an A minus room. Running back, I think the running back room is like, it could be an A. It's like A minus. I think that's a really solid room. Young, talented, varied. And quarterback to me is like a B plus room, A minus room, somewhere around there. So I mean, you got an interesting team. We'll talk about in future shows who are the keys to this roster becoming more than just a interesting team, but a good team? And who are the guys that potentially can take it over the top? I do see a question from Eric Tamura, one of our members, YouTube members. And so going to answer this. With the discussion around Jamal Adams potentially coming back at a different position, are there any current players on the roster that might switch positions to add depth at areas of need? We talked about Draymond Jones. I have moved him from defensive line to outside linebacker edge. So that's one. We've talked about Kobe Bryant, who's moved really from cornerback to safety. I think those are the two largest. I also talked about Jack Westover, who could, while he's considered a tight end, I think he's more of an H-back, and he could end up being part of the running back room as well as the tight end room. So that's another. Outside of that, I don't know that I see a lot of other guys hopping around. Mike Jackson, we've talked about, maybe at safety. That's a possibility and could open up some more space for a guy like Nehemiah Pritchett and push someone like Jonathan Sutherland off the roster. One to watch. So good question, and those are some of the names that come to mind for me. All right, everybody, that is your 53-man roster. First projection for me on the year of who makes the squad. Looking forward to the schedule coming out this week. We'll talk about that. I think we're going to start going around some different parts of the NFC West and talking about which position groups, ranking them against each other. I want to do that. So a lot more to come. Appreciate having you all here. I hope you have a wonderful day. If you haven't already, please click the like button and subscribe and join as a YouTube member. The link is in the chat. And as a Patreon member, patreon.com/hawkblogger gets you access to the audio versions of this pod, as well as the Slack channel, which opens immediately to you when you sign up, and you get to hang out with a lot of other folks. I think people are making friends, talking Mariners, talking all sorts of Seahawks stuff. So a great place to be. All right, everybody. I'm Brian Emhauser. You can find me on Twitter at hawkblogger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.